Hello, hello, Sharon here from School Corridor. If you're an old follower, welcome. I'm sure we have been missing each other. And if you are a new follower or you just hopped onto this channel, then I want to say welcome. You're here at the right time. So with School Corridor, I think, I wanted to share, just have a heart-to-heart talk and tell those who have been following me and the new followers that School Corridor is going to undergo some kind of transformation. And I think it has to do with the transformation or the insights that I have not only gained, but that has become like an urge where I feel I haven't really been true to serving the community as I can possibly serve the community. Now, for all that to make sense, like this is like a confessional, I would suggest grab that cup of coffee, grab that cup of tea, grab your glass of wine, get a sandwich because this is going to be a bit of a long chat. Because I just want to take you back and tell you how School Corridor started and what I see in the future for School Corridor, right? So I'm going to give you a little bit of background about who is Sharon, where does she fit in, and why should we really care about what Sharon has to say. So yeah, let me start. First of all, I think it's important that I share that I am a learner. I love learning things. I am curious about so many things. I read a lot of books. I also watch many YouTube channels. I love learning new information. And the key is that if I think that information is relevant to my community, I like to share that information, right? So I believe that knowledge shouldn't be privatized. We shouldn't see knowledge as belonging to somebody. I believe that when you get information, when you gain knowledge, your job should be to share that information, especially if you know that information can help other people. Okay? I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head. Right. Let's say I, as a teacher, never paid UIF, that unemployment benefit that you get. If you're a worker, you pay into this fund, and then when you become unemployed or you have death in the family or you fall ill, then you can withdraw those employment benefits. Now, as an educator, which I've been for 38 years, we never had to pay UIF, right? We never had to pay into that unemployment fund because there's always the assumption that teachers will always be employed. But my husband, who worked for the traffic services, he belonged to that fund. So when he passed on, I didn't know anything about it. But the human resource person who was liaising with me, she gave me a particular form and she said, listen, you must fill in this form and go to the labor department. And when you get to the labor department, hand it in there because the UIF also has a death benefit, which was a complete surprise to me. Anyway, I followed that information, took the form to the labor department, which is another story of my queuing and all those kinds of things. But I took my form in and then I did receive the death benefit. Okay. So when I realized that, I thought I've never heard people talking about this. And I thought, let me put this information out there because perhaps people don't know about it. And I put the information out, but I put it out on a TikTok video because remember, School Corridor is not dealing with school-based stuff. So I thought I don't want to, make the waters murky. And then School Corridor is also on Facebook, and that sort of mimics what's happening on YouTube. And I thought, okay, TikTok, which is sort of another platform that I use, there I've been posting community matters. There I've been posting information that I think the, man in the street needs. So I put that labor information on TikTok, and I'm telling you that video went viral, and I realized that that information is valuable and I should actually create a stream on School Corridor for the sharing of that information. But I digress. So that is what I mean when I say I like to learn and I like to consume knowledge. And if that knowledge is useful, I will pass it on so that other people can benefit from it as well. I think it's also a community, a part of my community culture where everybody shares. If you know something, you don't keep the information to yourself because you want to be better than your neighbor. Well, many people are like that, but I grew up in a community that loves to share and love to see people moving ahead. And so those are the kinds of people that my parents socialized with, and that is how my family is to a large extent. And that is why I have also immersed myself in that mindset, in that culture of Ubuntu. And Ubuntu is a very strong sort of cultural practice that we have in South Africa. So that's very much in line with what we expect our, South Africans to be doing for each other. And so that is a very strong point for me. And I became a teacher, yes. I have been a teacher for 38 years. I love teaching. I wanted to be a teacher from a very young age. Now, look, I think I've hinted at the fact that I also grew up in the community. In fact, I grew up as a backyard dweller. We lived on somebody's property, and we were 5 kids at the time, and we lived in our corrugated iron house, the shack. Well, we didn't think of it as a shack, but when I listen to people describing your home as a shack, and I'm thinking, that was like our palace, that's where we lived. That's where we made our memories. That's where we shared our love. But anyway, parents were working class parents. My parents were factory workers. My mom was a clothing factory worker. My dad worked in different factories, carpentry, woodworking, and then later became a driver for one of our local bus companies. But they were working class people. But the one thing about my parents was that education is very important. They stressed that. They forced it down our throats. We had to go to the public library to go do our research. We had to read books. We had to get new books every week or every 2 weeks. And then we also had to tell them what we're reading so that they could really see that we were reading. They were very, very obsessed about the fact that we must be educated. And the dream was for my parents that all of us had to complete matric. Now that was a huge, huge goal at the time, because people weren't earning much money. Your factory worker parents, your domestic worker parents, they weren't earning a lot of money. And as soon as you finished school, you finished at 6 at the time, and at 8 at the time, parents couldn't wait for you to go and find a job in the factory or work as a domestic worker or something. But my parents stuck to that because they wanted us to complete matric. They wanted to give us that head start. And today I am like ultra grateful, like uber grateful for my parents, who could have so easily taken the easy route and take us out of school and get us to work. In fact, let me tell you, at the time it wasn't the norm for your backyard dwellers, your poor people, to really go to your grade 12s, as we know it, standard 10 at the time. And even my aunts, because they saw how my parents were struggling, they would speak to my dad. My dad's sister, she would tell him, your son is old enough to go and work. Let him go and work. Let Trevor go work. Take the girls out. They're almost in standard 8, so they can also go work. And against all that family yapping, my father and my mother just stuck to their guns, and they made sure that we all complete our matric, right? So of course, and the other thing was, my dad wanted all of us to become teachers. He had this huge dream that everybody must become teachers, because he thought teaching is a good job, you got a stable job, and you'll move on in life. But anyway, my sisters and brothers decided they are not going into teaching, and of course I was born to be a teacher. I dreamt of being a teacher. I taught my brother and my sisters, at home. I always played school, and when we played with our friends, I wanted to be the teacher. So there was always that big dream to be a teacher. So of course I finished matric, no money, and then fortunately the state gives you a state bursary if you want to do teaching. So I got a state bursary, and there off I went to university. First generation of the family to go to university, got my degree, undergraduate degree, and then of course got my teaching diploma. And that's when I broke that generational curse in our family, and I became a teacher. Okay? So as a teacher, I then taught at Grassy Park High School for 25 years. I know. It's a lifetime. 25 years I taught at Grassy Park High School. But let me tell you, that school, back in the day, was regarded as the university of life. I couldn't have been placed at a better school to cut my teaching teeth. I was surrounded by people who were passionate about education. I was surrounded by people who were readers, people who were thinkers, people who were debaters. And at the time, I'm talking 1983, 1984, we were still in the clasp, in the claws, in the trap of apartheid, right? And so when you were, well, at our school, when you were a teacher, you weren't only expected to be, not expected, but the culture was, you cannot teach as if there is no context. You cannot teach as if there's no oppression. You cannot teach without taking into account that the apartheid system has been designed to keep people poor and to ensure that people do not get a high quality education. And so that was one of the drivers at Grassy Park High School. And so we would push each other literally to be better. And we would ensure that we were teaching the hidden curriculum as well, that we were giving the children a world view when we were teaching, that they could understand their reality and not only import the American or the European realities and teach them as if their reality doesn't exist. That is how we try to be relevant. That is how we try to be educationally sound. And that was a huge responsibility. But I must say, it wasn't a job to do that, because your colleagues were activists. Your colleagues were politicized. Your colleagues had a very deep understanding of the inequalities in society, and they had a very deep passion for education. So I was in the right place at the right time. I was in the right place at the right time because I grew by leaps and bounds. We were taught, not taught formally, but we debated robustly in our staff meetings. People who weren't part of our staff, if they came to our staff meetings, they were terrified because the language was of another level. The arguments that people had to put on the table were of such a high standard, right? You had to be thoughtful when you wanted to debate something, because you had to motivate why you wanted a particular action or a particular practice to happen at the school. So it wasn't willy-nilly. You can't just criticize a practice that we were busy with, or, for example, we had people who were almost obsessively learner-centered. They understood the learner's reality. They wanted to give the learners the best, and they didn't treat them as if they were dumb. Then we did have colleagues who thought that it's just a matter of being a mechanic, right? A mechanic in the class. So you just teach, the children must just absorb, and if they can't absorb, then unfortunately, they are not meant to study, okay? That was the driver at Grassy Park High School. And my colleagues sharpened my thinking. They sharpened the way I operated. They challenged the way we did things, and you were just almost organically shaped and taught to think differently and to do things differently as well. So Grassy Park, I owe a lot of my growth to Grassy Park. It wasn't easy. My principal, Clark Stadler, will tell you it was probably one of the most difficult staffs to work with, but we were so driven. We didn't want to just be teacher mechanics. We really wanted to offer the children the best quality education that we could give them, and give them that head start. Because I come from a community that was poor. Many of my colleagues came from communities that were poor. So we understood the bigger mission of fighting against apartheid, and that was to give the children the best education possible that we could give them, and not let them wallow in any self-pity or be lazy, right? So as we pushed the learners, so we pushed ourselves, the teachers. And that for me was a major growth period, over a period of 25 years. So I did my bit at school. And the kids loved us because they knew we were strict. There was tough love. We were very strict, but they loved us because they knew we cared. And even today, many of my students, those who entered education, some of them were my seniors by the time I retired. And it's so beautiful to see that, right? Many of my past students are friends of mine today. In fact, they still stay in touch via Facebook, via any medium, sometimes via WhatsApp. And if you go through a crisis, they are there. They are there. When I had to go to hospital for operation, guess who also inquired about my health and who came to visit? Some of my past students, particularly a young lady, very vibrant, called Bonnie, right? So Bonnie was like a glue. She'd make sure that people stay together. And when they have their reunions, they would invite us and they would tell us and be so full of admiration for us to tell us how we have transformed their lives, how we've impacted their lives. And then we often have to remind them that the very people whom we have helped to transform have also transformed our lives. And I make a point of telling them, especially when I see them or when it's Teacher Appreciation Day, they will still do shout outs for us. And I always remind them not to forget that it was a two-way street, that they were as impactful in our lives. They taught us how to be patient. They taught us how to love. They taught us how to be human. And for that, I will be ever grateful, right? So that was my teaching journey. So always a sharing of information. And like I say, not privatizing it, not keeping it and not wanting to share. Generally, that was the culture in the environment that I grew up in as well. So I was really on a good wicket, right? Then while I was in Grassy Park, obviously I moved through the ranks until I became part of the senior management team, and then eventually I became the acting principal. But during that time, I was also teaching on a learner empowerment program in Langa. Now, you tell me, what better experience can somebody like me have had, right? Here I am, having grown up poor, becoming educated, learning as I go along, going to teach at the community school, being stretched to capacity where iron sharpens iron, and I get this amazing opportunity to teach in Langa at the Learner Empowerment School, where the learners travel for about an hour to get to the school, because they come for enrichment programs there, right? So I was teaching English, and of course they would also be in my English class, and we had a ball of a time. I was learning from them, and they were learning from me. It was just beautiful. And then of course I must say the highlight of my Langa experience at on that empowerment program was buying the amaguinas. People, if you don't know what the amaguina is, it's like a fat cook, right? That lady, that cook, that made those amaguinas at Langa's acid program. It was the best, right? And so every day, I would go there on a Saturday. So that was my Saturday school, right? That I taught that for quite a few years, and I wouldn't have wished it any other way. But on a Saturday, I would then buy my amaguinas. I couldn't wait for break. I would buy 4. And the students already knew. Whoever goes and buys the amaguinas just before break, like 5 minutes before break, because it becomes quite busy. We had about 1,000 students on campus. Then one of them would volunteer. I would ask, then they would volunteer to go and buy it. Whoever is the volunteer gets 1 amaguina, right? And I keep the 3. 2 I eat during break, 1 I keep because while I'm driving home, I'm eating my amaguina. Amazing stuff. Crispy on the outside and soft and buttery on the inside. I didn't even want the filling. They used to fill it with bologna, I think, and some kind of sauce. But I just ate the plain amaguinas. That was my highlight at Langa. And then, of course, the students. And the teachers that I bonded with there. And the program directors. Again, learning, and picking up tips on how to be a better human being, how to relate to others, how to help others grow, and then of course absorbing like a sponge everything that could help me grow. So that's me. I just happened to land up at the right places at the right time, right? After leaving teaching, I then went to the education district, and there I became an education manager of schools, right? So principals had to report to me, and the school leadership team that we call the school management teams, they were also reporting to us, and of course we also had to support and manage their governance structure, the governing body. Not manage them, but ensure that the principal was in fact giving the guidance and support to the governing body. And so there was appointed as at the time called an IMG manager, and I served the schools in the very community in which I grew up in. So the primary school, Harmony Primary School that I attended, I was then in a supervisory capacity there, and I had the opportunity to engage the educators and the leadership there. And then I was also the manager of Steenberg High School, where I did my high school education, and there I could again also have a wonderful learning experience and offer the support that I could to that school. So there I was in the same community. Had I not grown up in this community, had I not come back to serve the very community in which I had grown up, I don't know what I would have done, and I think I would have been in serious debt with the Lord because I did not follow my mission in life, and that is to serve and to help others in the field of education in my community, and then of course elsewhere as well. But starting at your own home, starting at the place where you lay down your first roots. Of course, I learned a lot, engaged with the principals and so on, cried with many principals because they share heartbreaking stories, and you realize that, you know, there's almost a dismissal of the pain and the trauma and the energy and the will it takes to teach in a community school here in South Africa, especially where the communities are challenged and riddled with gangsterism and poverty and alcoholism and all kinds of social ills. It's very difficult if you didn't grow up in that environment, or you're not prepared to understand it, and you just have this idea that everybody is equal and they don't have a past and they don't have deficits in terms of their learning or their experience or whatever, and then you want to treat a top school in a leafy suburb the same as you would treat a school that's there deep in the neighborhood, where the people sit around the school fence, or the parents don't even show their faces, or the children don't even know where their parents are, and they come to school with all that trauma, hungry, and then the teachers must teach their child and deliver, right? It's a tough task. It's a hard task. And like I said, many a day, a principal would share the most heartbreaking stories, and I would sit there and just listen and then ignore that file that I know is up to date, because that focus was never really my focus. Because once you make sure that the principals and whoever's talking to you, that you are listening, they will do their utmost to ensure that they do the compliance bit as well. But at least you're showing that human compassion. And so you build them up again. You fill them with hope again. They know the system is not so cold, and then they move on again. And it's just amazing what amazing, wonderful, quality work comes out of many of our community schools, despite the conditions really not even making it possible to come up with such quality work. So that was an eye-opener for me, really. And like I said, it humbled me. And I always wondered, you can get so stuck if you're sitting there and everything looks hopeless. You look around you, everything is dark and dreary, and everybody just trying to survive. You go down 1 kilometer down the road and you see your colleagues struggling with the same things. Now, my question was, how do I help lift the school leadership and the principal in particular to know that all is not lost. That yes, sometimes we need to work a bit harder, but there are practices, there are structures, there are systems that if we do try to implement them, there will be eventually a swell of goodwill, a swell of improvement, and traction will be gained, and there will be momentum, and things will improve. But how do you share that information? Because you just have to go to the school, spend some time there at one school, then you must hop to the next school. There's no intensive coaching that can really happen realistically if you want to use that approach. So that was uppermost in my mind. How do I serve the schools? And going from school to school, the 20 schools, mainly community schools, I could see many amazing projects and practices and ways of doing things that I knew another colleague down the road could benefit from, right? And so, how do I create that opportunity for them to visit each other because they need to be at their own schools? And how do I just get them to just be excited to hear about it and then perhaps use their own initiative and go and visit their neighbor, right? And the only way that we can do that is to build community networks. So how do we build community networks? So we can do the physical community networks, and that is what brought me to School Corridor, the channel. I created the School Corridor channel to become another pathway to communicate with the schools and for the schools to start communicating with each other in an organic way. And that has proven to help because they could watch a video. I would visit the school and I would, for example, see the fantastic work that the school has done in terms of transforming the ablution blocks for the learners that lived and spelled out that dignity that they thought the learners deserved, and that they really meant they want to respect their learners, and their learners can feel safe and dignified when they go to the bathroom. And then I would take pictures of that, and I would interview the principal, the teachers, and just talk to them informally, and I would put that on the School Corridor channel, especially on Facebook. And so schools would see how other schools in the same neighborhood, with the same problems, with the same lack of financial resources and other resources, when they see how their colleagues have brought about change in a way that wouldn't cost them much and showing them that it's possible, I promise you, many schools started transforming their ablution blocks. And then they would send photos to us, or I would ask them to send the photos and post it. But of course, schools are also full, they have their pride, and they're also shy. They don't want to go and showcase themselves. And then I would be that bee. I would be that butterfly. I would be the one that would be posting and celebrating them. And in that way, I must say, there was a knock-on effect in some areas. And then I realized that is the power of School Corridor, that it becomes a pathway, a vehicle that people can get ideas from people who've gone through the same experiences and not selling them the theory that we can just see on the internet. Yes, to see how other schools are blossoming, we have to ask, yes, but at what cost? What resources did you put in there? But nothing stops us from taking the idea and then really running with that idea and tailoring it in such a way. And if you find a model of that very idea working elsewhere, what better way to inspire another school principal, another SMT, another school governing body to say, look, this is what this school is doing. Perhaps you can just give Sharon a call and take your staff there so that they can see, to help inspire your staff, because obviously it's better to also see these projects and see what people are doing. It's one thing just reading about it, but imagine the power of taking your staff there. And so that, guys, is how School Corridor was born. It was really a way of expanding my service of offering support, sharing information, sharing knowledge, sharing practices that schools could use, and helping principals to become stronger principals and confident principals and knowledgeable principals, and realize the important role they have to play. And I feel that School Corridor has a lot to offer in that field still for our specific communities in our country, South Africa. Okay? Yes, so that is the birthplace of School Corridor. Now I'd like to tell you about the expansion of School Corridor. Are you still here? Are you still okay? Because I can yap, and you can hear my dog yapping in the background there. So the second part that could be the third part. I must check my notes because I can get so carried away. I try to make notes to help keep me on track. And the main thing is, like I said, I gave you the example of how I shared the information about the UIF, how you can get that death benefit. Now, that is the kind of knowledge and information I'd like to share on School Corridor. I'd like to share and share practices and useful information that the man in the street, that my community can use. And that is the stream that I'm calling the community empowerment track or corridor in the School Corridor hub. Right? Because I think I've neglected that. I must serve my community where I can, and I think by fitting in the community empowerment track, I'm definitely even going beyond just seeing specifically to the school teachers and school staff, but also then catering for the parents at the school, catering for the children and the older brothers perhaps who are unemployed, who have not completed school. So in that way, I'll be reaching the other constituencies that also form part of the community, but it will be a track within the School Corridor channel, right? And then there's a third stream that I definitely want to put in as well. I think I need to spend more time with that, and that would be a track that deals with personal development or self-growth or reinventing yourself. And I think that kind of stream will allow me to post motivational stuff, will allow me to post inspirational videos, on health, how to look after your health, how to manage your finances and that kind of thing. So the personal growth the personal growth stream will be sort of like a third corridor, but that stream will apply to both the school specific population, and it will apply to the community specific population that are being catered for on the School Corridor channel. That was a mouthful. It's not about me. It's really about fulfilling the service to my community. Whether that community is in my formal, qualified space, and that is teaching, that I formally qualified in, or whether it's my life experience that I've gained, or my research experience that has helped me gain more information. It doesn't matter. It's about sharing what is useful, sharing what is valuable. So drop me a line. Thanks for hanging around. If you're here till now, then I'm telling you, you are committed School Corridorian. You are a committed school corridorian. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do subscribe and please help me grow the channel by sharing your ideas, by questioning. You may even differ with me on certain things. Put it there because you're helping me to grow just as I'm helping you to grow. So, on that note, I will see you soon.